the Xerix Empire had seen it all. For millennia, they had conquered and crushed civilizations with terrifying efficiency. Their war machines, colossal and advanced, were unrivaled across the stars. No species had ever dared defy them for long. The galaxy had learned to either submit or face complete annihilation, and the Xerix generals were proud of their empire's reputation for bringing worlds to their knees. So, when the Xerix fleet set its sights on Earth, they saw it as just another easy victory, a small, backwater planet in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The humans, they assumed, would crumble under their might, just as every other species had. The humans had barely mastered space travel, and their weapons were no match for the Xerix's energy-based technology. Their cities would fall, their governments would dissolve, and Earth would become just another conquered world in the Xerix's ever-expanding empire. But Earth, as the Xerix were about to learn, was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The first contact was swift and brutal. Xerix warships descended into Earth's orbit like dark harbingers of doom. Their energy cannons fired upon Earth's largest cities, obliterating skyscrapers and creating massive craters on the surface. The Xerix ships unleashed devastating waves of force, shaking the planet's very core. The humans fought back, but they were outgunned, outmatched, and clearly overwhelmed by the alien onslaught. Or so the Xerix thought. General Rorik, the commander of the Xerix fleet, stood in the command center of his flagship, observing the destruction unfolding across Earth. He spoke into the comms, his voice cold and calculating. "We are making swift work of their defenses. Prepare the ground forces. Once we reduce their cities to rubble, we will send in the final wave to secure the planet." His soldiers, towering figures in their exosuits, moved with military precision, engaging Earth's few remaining defenders. Tanks and soldiers, human ones, were no match for the alien technology, and Xerix warriors mowed through them like grass. But what Rorik didn't understand was that the humans weren't fighting for land or resources, they were fighting for their very survival. Aboard a human naval vessel, Commander Sarah Hunter paced back and forth, her face grim. She had witnessed the onslaught firsthand, seen the devastation across her home planet. Her command center was filled with smoke and the flashing red lights of battle alarms. But in her eyes, there was no fear. She was ready for the fight, not just for Earth, but for every human who had ever lived and fought for their right to exist. "We're not going down without a fight," Sarah said, her voice steady. "Bring the fighters online. Get every human ship into the air. If we're going to do this, we do it together." Her officers scrambled to comply. They knew the odds were slim, but they also knew that the humans, despite their lack of advanced technology compared to the Xerix, had something that no alien race could ever prepare for, a fierce will to survive, no matter the cost. On Earth's surface, pockets of resistance were starting to form. Soldiers, civilians, and civilians-turned-soldiers gathered in makeshift strongholds. What the Xerix couldn't anticipate was how the human spirit worked together in times of crisis. Communities that had once been divided by politics, religion, and national borders now stood united. Every human, no matter their background, knew what was at stake. Jack Hammer Malone, a grizzled Marine veteran, was one of those who refused to back down. As the Xerix advanced, he rallied his troops and civilians in a makeshift fortress in a downtown area. "This is our world, and we're not giving it up," he said, his voice ringing with confidence. "We've been through worse than this. We fight. We survive. That's what humans do." The Xerix were shocked. They had expected terror. They had expected panic. Instead, they found an unrelenting resistance that wasn't willing to bend to their will. It wasn't long before the Xerix realized they were facing something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated, a species that fought with everything they had, even when the odds were stacked against them. As the battle raged on, General Rorik's arrogance began to waver. His troops were still advancing, but every inch of Earth they took came at a cost. The human forces fought in ways they couldn't predict. They adapted, they improvised, and they didn't stop. This wasn't the easy conquest they had envisioned. The human military might have been outgunned, but it was anything but outmatched. And the Xerix, who had believed themselves to be unstoppable, were beginning to understand the true cost of underestimating humanity. "Is this all you've got?" a voice crackled over the Xerix communication network. It was Commander Sarah Hunter, her voice sharp and unyielding. "You came here expecting us to kneel. You expected us to cower in fear. But now you're going to learn why humanity will never back down." General Rorek's eyes narrowed as he listened to the transmission. For the first time since the invasion began, he felt the sting of doubt. But it was too late. Humanity had already made its stand. The Xerix fleet had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now, the battle was far from over. General Rorek paced back and forth in the command center of his flagship, his massive form a dark shadow against the bright display screens. He had been confident, almost smug, when his forces first arrived in Earth's atmosphere. Now, his once perfect plan was starting to unravel. The humans, despite their primitive technology and seemingly fragmented society, were putting up an unexpected fight. Their resistance, while no match for the Xerix's advanced weaponry, was relentless and tenacious. "We're making progress," one of his officers reported, his voice shaky. "But the humans, they refuse to break. Their forces are more coordinated than we anticipated. They've taken to guerrilla tactics, hitting us from every corner. It's like they're everywhere." "Everywhere," Rorek repeated, his voice dripping with disgust. "They should be cowering. This is supposed to be a slaughter, not a prolonged engagement. What is it about them that refuses to break?" The officer hesitated before responding. "It's their spirit, sir. They seem driven. They fight not just for survival, but for something more. And every attack we make, they respond with greater ferocity." Rorek growled in frustration, slamming his fist on the control panel. "Enough with your excuses. I want results. The Xerix Empire doesn't bow to resistance." But deep down, Rorek knew there was something different about this fight. He could see the fire in the eyes of the humans, something he hadn't expected. It wasn't just about resources or power. Earth wasn't just another conquest. It was their home, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to protect it. Meanwhile, on Earth's surface, humanity was beginning to adapt. The humans weren't just defending their cities or their territory, they were now playing an entirely different game. The tides of war had shifted. Earth's makeshift resistance was evolving, using every advantage they could exploit. The humans had learned quickly. Every day, they grew stronger, and the Xerix began to feel the pressure. Jack Malone stood at the front lines, his rifle gripped tightly in his hands as he observed the chaos unfolding before him. He had seen it all before: war, loss, and the devastation that followed. But today, something was different. There was a fire in the hearts of his fellow soldiers, civilians, and volunteers. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting for their home, their families, and their future. "Keep pushing forward," Jack shouted to his team as they stormed the Xerix stronghold in the heart of the city. His voice was filled with a fierce determination that echoed across the battlefield. "We're not giving up this ground. Not now, not ever." The human forces, a combination of soldiers and civilians, pushed into the Xerix lines with a fury that surprised even Jack. They fought from rooftops, alleyways, and underground tunnels, employing guerrilla warfare tactics that the Xerix hadn't prepared for. The humans used everything they could: makeshift bombs, traps, and even their civilian vehicles, turned into armored trucks. Each attack was unpredictable, and each victory was hard-won. Sarah Hunter, leading the charge from Earth's Defense Command, had a calm but determined look on her face. She was in constant communication with every unit, directing their movements with surgical precision. She knew this battle wasn't just about power. It was about heart. "We've got their ship's weak points now," she said, speaking into the comms as her hand gripped a holographic map of the alien fleet. "Get the bombers in the air. Target their energy cores. It's time to show the Xerix we mean business." As the Xerix warships continued to bombard the cities, humanity launched its counterattack. Earth's air forces, though vastly outnumbered, used everything at their disposal: scrambled fighter jets, experimental weapons, and even homemade rockets. The human fighters swarmed through the skies like hornets, dodging alien fire and targeting the ship's weak spots. Meanwhile, Earth's ground forces were taking the battle to the Xerix invaders directly. In every city, groups of soldiers, civilians, and resistance fighters had taken up arms. No one was afraid to die for their home. The Xerix were not only fighting against humanity, they were fighting against a species that refused to submit, no matter how overwhelming the odds. Back on the Xerix flagship, General Rorik's frustration reached a boiling point. His fleet was beginning to lose ground, and his forces had been caught off guard by the humans' resilience. His plans, once flawless, were now being torn apart by an enemy he couldn't understand. "We need reinforcements," Rorik barked. "Call in the second wave. We can't afford to lose this world. Send in the full force." But as the command was given, Rorik knew deep down that Earth was not like any other world they had conquered. This fight would not be won with sheer force alone. The humans had something the Xerix had never encountered: an unwavering spirit that refused to bow to anyone. And that, more than anything, was what the Xerix feared most. The Xerix fleet, once an unstoppable force, was now in retreat. General Rorik paced anxiously across the bridge of his flagship, his sharp eyes scanning the data feeds streaming across the glowing screens. The situation had spiraled far beyond his expectations. Despite their overwhelming technological superiority, the humans had proven to be an insurmountable obstacle. The ground they had gained was quickly slipping through their grasp. Earth's resistance had adapted, and their unrelenting attacks had forced the Xerix into a defensive position. "Report," Rorik demanded, his voice a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "General," one of his officers began cautiously, "their forces continue to outmaneuver us. We've lost contact with several of our patrols on the surface. There's an increased human presence on every front. Our scanners are detecting unusual human tactics, coordinated hit-and-run operations and guerrilla attacks that are overwhelming our units." The general's fists clenched at his sides. How are they able to move so quickly? Their technology is inferior. They cannot possibly possess the speed or the tactical advantage to be this effective. They are using the terrain to their advantage, sir. The humans are unpredictable, much more than anticipated. They're working in close-knit groups, attacking from areas we can't cover, the officer responded, voice trembling. Rorik's face darkened as he thought back to the first days of the invasion. He had been so certain that this would be an easy conquest. The Xerix were invincible, their technology far superior to anything Earth could have mustered. But he had underestimated one thing, the very thing that had turned the tide of this war. He had underestimated humanity's capacity to fight, to survive, and to never give up. Why do they resist? Rorik muttered to himself. They should have surrendered by now. Why continue when they are clearly outmatched? The officer hesitated, then spoke softly. It seems, they fight for something more than just survival. Their cities may burn, their people may die, but they are fighting for their world, General. They're fighting for everything they've built. Rorik's eyes narrowed in thought. He had heard of human tenacity, of course, but the stories had always been dismissed as exaggerated tales of primitive pride. But now, faced with the undeniable proof that humanity would not relent, he began to feel the weight of that misconception. Back on Earth, Commander Sarah Hunter had shifted from defense to offense. The humans had learned how to strike at the heart of the Xerix fleet, and now they were turning their attention to the warships hovering above. The time for merely holding their ground was over. It was time to show the Xerix that the humans weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. Lock onto their energy core, Sarah instructed her officers as they prepared for the next strike. We've got one shot at this. Make it count. Her team moved swiftly, their actions a perfect reflection of the unity humanity had found in its darkest hour. They had been pushed to the brink, but they had not broken. Earth's Air Force, civilian pilots included, launched a new wave of attacks, hitting Xerix warships with devastating precision. As missiles soared through the sky and human fighters swarmed the alien ships, the Xerix fleet began to feel the first tremors of real fear. For the first time, the Xerix generals and their soldiers saw their massive warships torn apart by humans who refused to fall, no matter how much power the aliens unleashed. Every missile that struck, every blast that hit its mark, carried with it the voice of humanity's defiance. The tide of the battle had shifted. Rorik could feel it. His fleet, once invincible, was now vulnerable. His soldiers were fighting with their backs against the wall, and though they still had the technological advantage, it was no longer enough. The humans had adapted and were striking with an intensity that the Xerix were not prepared for. "We cannot lose this world," Rorik growled, his voice low and filled with anger. "Send in the reinforcements. Full force now. We'll break them, or we'll die trying." But as the orders were given, the Xerix forces found themselves facing an entirely new reality. Earth was no longer a helpless world that could be subdued through sheer might. It was a planet that had embraced its strength, its unity, and its will to fight, and it had become something the Xerix could not easily defeat. On the surface, Jack Malone and his team continued to lead their fellow soldiers, coordinating attacks on Xerix supply lines and war machines. His eyes burned with determination, and his voice rang out, giving orders to the men and women who had fought beside him from the very start. "We don't stop now," Jack shouted over the noise of the battle, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "They thought we were weak, that we'd break under their firepower. But we're not going anywhere. Keep pushing." The Xerix were feeling the pressure, and as their war machines began to falter, they realized the true cost of their invasion. Humanity, once seen as a primitive species, had proven something far more dangerous. They had shown the galaxy that when pushed to the edge, humanity would rise, not in fear, but in fury. "We're not just defending Earth anymore," Jack said, looking out over the battlefield. "We're sending a message to every empire out there. You don't mess with humanity." As the human resistance continued to fight, the Xerix began to realize they had made a fatal error. They had underestimated the strength of the human spirit, and now, it was too late to turn back. The final battle had begun, and there was no turning back. Earth's forces, having pushed the Xerix to their limits, were now on the offensive. The tide had turned so dramatically that even General Rorik's immense arrogance could no longer shield him from the reality. Humanity was not just defending itself, they were taking the fight directly to the Xerix. As Earth's forces surged forward, General Rorik stood in the command center of his flagship, the once proud Xerix fleet now battered and broken around him. His soldiers were faltering, the once perfect formations now in disarray. His warships, once invulnerable, were now burning wrecks in the distance. Humanity's resistance had crushed the once feared fleet's confidence, and now, it was all coming apart at the seams. Rorik clenched his fists, his eyes burning with frustration. This cannot be happening. They were supposed to fall. This was supposed to be an easy conquest. But no matter how many reinforcements he called in, no matter how many ships the Xerix sent to Earth's orbit, it wasn't enough. Every single countermeasure was met with a tenacious, human response. Every bombardment was met with defiance. Earth had proved what the Xerix never expected: the human spirit could not be crushed. On Earth's surface, Commander Sarah Hunter and Jack Malone had coordinated a massive offensive that was now sweeping across the battlefield. In cities across the planet, resistance fighters and military personnel were closing in on the remnants of the Xerix forces. What was left of the Xerix army, once an unstoppable force, was now crumbling in the face of the human fight for survival. Jack stood on the front lines, surveying the remains of the Xerix war machines, his face grim but resolute. His team had just secured another victory, a critical Xerix stronghold had fallen, and now Earth's forces were prepared to launch their final assault on the Xerix flagship. The Xerix general's fleet was in disarray, but they still held a powerful weapon in the form of their last remaining warship, which hovered above Earth like a dark cloud, ready to unleash hell if they were pushed too far. "This is it," Jack said, his voice firm and steady, rallying the troops around him. "We've got one shot at this. We end this today. No more fighting, no more waiting. We finish what we started." The Marines, alongside the civilian volunteers who had fought for weeks, nodded in agreement. They had seen the destruction, the pain, and the sacrifice, but they had also seen how the Xerx had underestimated them at every turn. The final assault on the Xerx flagship was more than a military operation, it was the culmination of humanity's defiance. Earth had not only survived, the planet had begun to reclaim what had been stolen from them. As the final assault force prepared to board their assault ships, Jack and Sarah shared one last look before they set off. They didn't need to speak, both of them understood what was at stake. This was the last push. The Xerx fleet had underestimated humanity at every turn, but now, humanity would make them regret their miscalculations. In space, Earth's fleet gathered for the final strike. As the Xerx flagship loomed large in the distance, its intimidating presence a reminder of their brutal advance, the human fleet moved with precision. Fighter jets, bombers, and assault ships coordinated seamlessly, each group taking its designated target. Humanity's forces weren't just attacking with firepower, they were attacking with everything they had left. "Hold steady," Sarah said into her comms, watching the Xerx ship's energy reading spike as the final assault began. "This is our moment." The first salvo of missiles flew toward the Xerx flagship, hitting its shields with a massive force. The flagship responded, firing back with beams of destructive energy that ripped through the surrounding ships. But Earth's forces were relentless. Every shot from the Xerx was met with tenacious retaliation from human ships. The warships, though outclassed in terms of raw power, had one critical advantage: humans knew how to survive. They weren't fighting for glory or conquest. They were fighting to protect their homes. As the Xerx flagship began to weaken under the pressure of Earth's final assault, Rorik's anger reached a boiling point. "What are they waiting for?" he shouted. "Bring the full force to bear. We will not lose to them." But his orders came too late. Earth's final strike hit the flagship's core, and the Xerx ship erupted into a brilliant explosion. The force of the blast sent shockwaves through the surrounding Xerx fleet, and for the first time, the general knew that the battle was lost. The Xerx fleet was destroyed. Earth's forces had won. Against impossible odds, against an overwhelming enemy, humanity had fought back, proving that their will to survive was more powerful than any alien fleet. As the remnants of the Xerx fleet fled into the stars, General Rorik stood alone on the bridge of his flagship, watching his empire crumble. He had lost the war, not because of the superior technology of his forces, but because he had underestimated the one thing that made humanity unstoppable, the strength of their resolve. Jack Malone stood on the surface of Earth, watching the skies clear. The battle was over, but the victory was more than just a military success. It was a message to the galaxy that Earth was not a planet to be conquered. Earth was a force to be reckoned with. "We didn't just survive," Jack said quietly, turning to his comrades. "We won." And with that, the last remnants of the Xerx Empire retreated into the depths of space, leaving Earth to rebuild, stronger than ever. Humanity had not only defeated their invaders, they had sent a message to the galaxy that no one could ignore: humans would not be broken.